My name is Maya Ahmed. My date of birth is 1st of January 1977, and I was born in Kuwait.
Is Kuwait the only place that your family migrated to from Egypt? And when did they migrate?
Yes, it is. And my mom and dad actually moved to Kuwait as newlyweds, I think in 1970 or 1969. I'm not exactly sure. Uh, and then they traveled to England, where my dad was doing his CFA, I think. And then they were back to Kuwait. They had my older sister. My mom had my older sister in Egypt, but then they were back in Kuwait by 1977. They had me in Kuwait, and then my dad got a job in Luxembourg, where we all moved as a family for a couple of years, and then we were back again in Kuwait in 1980, where I stayed till 1984, and then we left Kuwait. My mom, my sister, and I, we left in 1984. And then I was back again in 2006 as an adult. I stayed there for 15 years, and I just got back to Egypt permanently a few months ago.
And in both cases, in your parents' migration and your migration in 2006, what were their reasons for moving to Kuwait? And why did they choose Kuwait?
Well, I'm not sure about my parents exactly why they chose Kuwait specifically. All I know is that my dad, some of his family members, like my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, a couple of my aunts, one of my uncles, they decided to leave to Kuwait in the late 60s and the early 70s for reasons. Well, I think they wanted to start a life outside of Egypt at that time. And you know that this is the time where most Egyptians decided to migrate to Kuwait and other Gulf regions. I think this was the time where, you know, the Gulf region boomed and was very attractive for expats. That's for my parents. As for me, I went back to Kuwait in 2006 because I had been married in Egypt, and I had my daughter, my only daughter in Egypt. And I stayed there after I got married about 6 or 7 years. And then my husband back then, because we're divorced now, he got an opportunity, a job opportunity. He was a banker, and he got a job opportunity in Kuwait. And so we decided to leave.
You mentioned that a lot of your family were already in Kuwait. Was that, do you think, was it a motivational factor for your parents to move there? And how did it affect your childhood being there?
Yes, I think definitely it was a motivation for my family to move there. I think like they collectively decided to move to Kuwait. I'm not sure who moved before who. Like I'm not sure if my dad went before my grandfather, or was it vice versa. But they kind of got each other, you know. And actually, it affected my childhood in a very positive way, because usually people who live outside their countries, they're like deprived of family gatherings and things like that. For me, that really wasn't the case at all, because my grandparents were there, my uncles and aunts were there. Actually, also my maternal aunt, she was there. She was married to one of my dad's friends, and she and my mom moved together as newlyweds. My uncle was there. He's an obstetrician. My mother's uncle was there. He was an obstetrician too, and he was able to bring my uncle also to work there. My uncle still works there till today. So I had a lot of family members there, cousins, extended family members, friends. Like it was a very big community, and I must say I thrived in Kuwait as a child. I had a great childhood. Like it didn't feel like anything. Like I missed my maternal grandparents, for example, but other than that, mostly everyone I liked in my family was there too, and that made it a very nice experience.
Given that so much of your family was there, did you still go back to Egypt for vacations in the summers? How did you maintain a connection to Egypt?
Yeah, we did. We always traveled to Egypt every summer, and we stayed at my maternal grandparents' house. That was also it was a lot of fun, because my sister and I, and also our other cousins, were also living in Kuwait. who we were very tight with, and we used to go to the same school with. We'd be together in the summer at my grandparents' house, and sometimes we go on trips to the countryside. My mother comes from a city called Munofeya, so we sometimes went on trips to the countryside. And actually, it was fun because I think that as a child growing up abroad, your parents are very focused on making you love your country, and they take you sightseeing. So I remember going to the Citadel and like the Egyptian Museum, and we'd go attend plays and things. So it was actually a fun time all around.
You also mentioned the fact that you and your cousins went to the same school. What kind of school did you go to, and to what extent was your community Egyptians versus people of other nationalities, or even, locals, Kuwaitis?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because I went to an international school in Kuwait where my cousins also went to the same school. It's a New English School of Kuwait. It remains to date one of the best schools in Kuwait. And okay, let me tell you something. So because my daughter also went to an international school in Kuwait like 15 years ago. So I would say that at the time when I was young in the early 80s, schools like that were mainly for expats. You'd only see like little enrollment from Kuwaiti students. Like I remember only having 2 or 3 Kuwaitis in my class, and one of them was actually from the royal family. So at that time, in the early 80s, not too many Kuwaitis were enrolling their kids at international schools. They were mainly for expats, whether from Western or Arab countries. There were a number of Egyptians. There were students from other Arab countries like Palestinians, Syrians, Lebanese, Jordanians. Also, there were students from Muslim non-Arab countries like Iranis, Pakistanis, from other countries like India, from Western, all sorts of Western countries. But like a few years ago, when we enrolled my daughter at an international school, I noticed there's a big difference. Like now, mostly international schools are made up of Kuwaitis. It's not as rare as it used to be to find Kuwaitis in international schools. Actually, they make up most of the population of those schools now. And also, if I may add, a difference I also felt is that back in the 80s, international schools were kind of like an international school had all the traditions and all the culture of a Western country, but on Kuwaiti soil. Like I remember this incident where one of our family members, she got veiled at the age of, I think, 15 or 16. She was veiled as in she wore the hijab. She was the first girl at school to do that. And I think she didn't think that she needed any like prior permission to doing that. And she just put her hijab on and went to the school the first day. And she was called to the principal's office. And as soon as she walked in and he closed the door, he pulled the veil off her head and was very angry. And he was like, "What is this? And what do you think you're doing? And we do not accept this in our school." And she and her parents had to battle, to get this to be acceptable at the school. And then other people from my family and from friends of family followed in her footsteps later on. But in recent years, like when I enrolled my daughter at an international school in Kuwait, I could see that they had many veiled female students. Actually, the veil is part of the school uniform now. Like they have a unified veil for all girls who want to be veiled and wear the hijab at school. So also like celebrating Christmas at school, all these things you'd see in a Western school, like even the relationships between boys and girls and, PDA was really a thing in the 80s. People would do it very normally at school. That hasn't become it's definitely like you can feel that in recent years, international schools have very much come to understand that they're part of a Muslim Arab community, and that they need to be very respectful of the traditions and what is accepted by this community and what is not.
That's really interesting because I think it reflects a wider pattern where the local and expat populations sort of the rift between them grew. But I'm also interested because I'd like to ask more about your second migration. But before I do that, when you think back to your childhood in Kuwait, what were your first impressions of Kuwait, both you personally and your family?
Well, actually, I was very young, to be honest. I lived in Kuwait between the age of 4 and 8 years. So I was really, really young. But as I told you, it was always a good time. Uh, Looking back at my experience now as an adult, and after being back to Kuwait as an adult, I realized that at that time in the early 80s, I think we were not your everyday Egyptians in Kuwait, because we went to an international school. My dad was very well paid. He was working for the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, the KPC, as a financial consultant. He used to travel a lot on business trips to Europe and other places. We lived in a very high standard. The building where our apartment was in Salmiya is still to date one of the best buildings. It's still very well maintained, and it's much sought after by expats for rent. We used to go to fancy restaurants, like I realized later when I came back to Kuwait in the 2000s that not all Egyptians live in Kuwait like that. Like mostly people are going to make money, save money. They're willing to deprive themselves and sometimes their families of so many things. And it's kind of like they put their life on pause while they're in Kuwait for years, hoping that when they return one day back home, they'll be able to enjoy the fruits of their long years of labor. That's really not how my family lived in Kuwait at that time. And my memories are, because we were in the 80s, so Egypt was not in its best, economic state. As a child, they could be very minor things, but many of the things that were available in Kuwait, the products, the chocolates, the things weren't available in Egypt. So it felt like it was a luxurious life. Also, because of Kuwait's weather, Kuwait is known for its very hot weather. So it's kind of growing up in an incubator, because mostly you're in a closed, air-conditioned space most months of the year, and that hasn't changed up till now. But like during fall or spring, when the weather was fine, we'd have like those outings with our family members and our friends. We'd go to the beach or we'd go to the park. Like there are beaches that are known in Kuwait, like El Mesila Beach, Abu Hasayna. Actually, I'm not sure till now if it's Al Hassania. There was this park, it was called Al Hizam Al Akhdar, the Green Belt. I have very fond memories of these outings. Like we used to go out to barbecue or swim or just play in the kids area. It was a really good time. And it was a nice feeling of being surrounded by your people and your community. It was really a good time. But also, I think one of my earliest realizations of living away from your family, I remember that very distinctly. That my mom was very close with her paternal grandma, and she passed away while we were in Kuwait. And I just remember seeing my mom sitting and crying silently, and just feeling like there was nothing she could do about it other than sit and be sad. And I think that was the first time, although I was surrounded by family and friends and all, I think that was the first time I realized that, oh, there is a price for living outside your country. Like you can't be with your family at times like these. I think that that impacted me very much, just seeing her like that. And that scene just stayed with me for a very long time.
I'm curious, maybe it wasn't so much applicable to you because you were a child, but it obviously did affect your parents, whether you felt that they had any struggles or challenges in adapting to the new country and the new culture.
I don't think I really can tell, because by the time I was born and we moved back from Luxembourg, they had already been in Kuwait for many years. So I don't think I can really speak of their challenges when they first moved there. Like I really, I don't think I'm in a place to speak about that. But what I can tell you is that when we were there in the 80s, because communication was nothing like it is right now. Like there was no Zoom or Skype or any of these means to communicate with your family. Like I remember if my mom wanted to call her family, she'd need to make a phone call where she'd request a long distance call, and then maybe half an hour, an hour, or 2 hours later, she'd get that call. And communication was difficult, and and the line would break while she's speaking. I think it was just very hard for them to communicate with their families in Egypt, or especially my mom, because my dad, most of his family was there. But for my mom, I think it was hard. And also because there was no satellite or the TV channels, the thousands of TV channels that are available now. It was hard to stay connected with what's going on in Egypt. You'd only know that through the news or through the newspapers, or you didn't have the access that we have now, to watching the local Egyptian channels, or knowing what's going on, or being aware of the pop culture in Egypt. So I think they missed out on a lot. I think they were missing out on a lot. And they invested a lot of time during summer vacations to reconnect with their families and the country. And whenever we'd go back to Egypt, they'd be like, oh, this wasn't here last year, or oh, they have this now, or which is not the kind of thing that happens now, because now you're like, you can have a daily update on everything that's going on in your country, with videos and photographs and everything. That wasn't the case for them.
You've mentioned quite a few times the difference, between when your parents moved there and when you moved there. And so I kind of want to pivot to when you moved there as an adult. First of all, the differences that you noticed from the Kuwait that you remembered as a child, but also the challenges or any struggles you had in adapting to this place that was kind of familiar, but you were seeing it at a new time, at a different stage of your life.
Yeah, well, when I moved back, yeah, as you said, it felt familiar to me, especially, that my old school was there, my old house was there. So it was nice to see these places again after 22 years. It felt very familiar. Like I felt I was lucky that the job my husband got was in Kuwait rather than any other country, because I could still feel a connection to the country. But yeah, I had a hard time adapting at first, because I was staying at home. I stayed at home for 2 years. It was not until I got a job like 2 or 2.5 years after I moved. And I didn't know many people. Most of my family left, because by the time of the invasion and the early 90s, like almost all of my family had left. It was only my uncle who's there. So I really had no relatives. I had no friends. My daughter was young at the time. And I was just a stay-at-home mom. And there's really not much to do in Kuwait. Like it's mostly you either go out to dine or you go out to shop. Like there's not a lot to do. The weather doesn't help you also. Especially the time I remember arriving there in March. So it was already getting very hot. It's not like the kind of thing where you'd go out for a walk, or it wasn't like that. So I had a hard time at the beginning. There wasn't much to do. My husband was busy with his work. My daughter would go to her school, and there wasn't much to do. And I felt isolated. I think I was kind of depressed the first 2 years until I was able to get a job, which I got through friends of friends, like Egyptian friends of friends. So no, it was a hard time at the beginning.
I was actually just about to ask what your relationship was with other Egyptians in Kuwait, and whether you were able to you mentioned that that was how you got the job, but also whether that was a sense of community for you at all.
Well, actually, no, I wouldn't say there was a community for the first 2 years. Well, what happened the first 2 years is we had like friends of my husband's brother who used to live there. So these were our only community, them and their friends. And they also had little kids who would, play with my daughter. We go out like every few weeks. We'd sometimes visit each other at home. Maybe during the month of Ramadan, we would meet, we would have breakfast together. So that was kind of nice. That kind of gave us a sense of having a community, but they're all people that we'd only known just a few months early. I wouldn't say it's a fake community because they were actually very nice, very genuine people, but it's the fact that you feel like you're clinging on to anything or anyone who resembles a community, you know? And I think a lot of people, like, we were lucky because these people were good people. They were genuine. They were helpful. We were all supportive of each other. But I think that for some people who move to other countries and try to attach themselves to other Egyptians who are there, they're not always that lucky.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel like this changed, or let me rephrase that. How do you feel like things changed when you got a job, if they did at all?
Oh, they changed like 180 degrees. They completely changed because I had gotten a driving license after I got to Kuwait. A few months after I got to Kuwait, and the only reason I was able to get it is because my husband was a manager. Because only few people are able to get driving licenses in Kuwait. So I got one, but I wasn't actually using it a lot because we just had one car. But then when I got a job, I got my own car. I was going out every day. I was meeting people every day. Actually, there were a lot of Egyptians where I worked. I worked at one of the adult training institutes in Kuwait. There were many Egyptians, and I felt very connected to them. It was a very warm place. It felt like, like the group of people who worked there felt like a family. And it was great. I stayed there. I worked there for 11 years. And I think I've made some of my best friendships at that place. And not only with Egyptians. I made friendships with other Arabs. I made friendships with the Kuwaitis. And actually, having said that, I must say that all the Kuwaitis I have met at my workplace, or most of them, have been very nice, very decent people. And I had the chance, to visit their houses and experience their culture, and that was very enriching. I would say that getting a job in Kuwait has enriched my life there very much.
Mm-hmm. And aside from your job, I'm also curious from the perspective of, having a family in Kuwait, whether you felt that there were any challenges in that.
Yeah, there definitely were, because although my daughter was getting a good education, and she was doing well at school, and she had friends and all, but there was always this feeling that she's growing up like, she has an isolated upbringing at the end of the day. Because unlike me, like, I think I was luckier than my daughter in the fact that we had many family members, and aunts and uncles and grandparents when I was young. My daughter actually had none of that. So I think it was quite isolated. And I think that one of the hardest things now, after we've left Kuwait, like, my husband and I got divorced in about 11 years ago. And I still continued living there for years after that with my daughter. But I think that one of the problems with growing up in Kuwait is that because Kuwait is how it is, and once you get out of it, it's very hard for you to go back even on a visit visa or something, unless, of course, you're from a Western country. I think that I feel now bad because I feel that my daughter has grown up in a place for like 15 years, but now even if she wants to reconnect with old friends or visit her old school, or take a walk in the street where we lived, that's just not possible. And I think I've only realized after she grew up and after we left that I wouldn't say it's a mistake. Of course, it wasn't a mistake, but I would have preferred a lot that my daughter would grow up in a place where we're able to reconnect with whenever we want. And that, unfortunately, is not possible with Kuwait specifically.
I think that's definitely a common thread between a lot of the Gulf countries where they're not built for permanence. It's very much a temporary presence, and everyone who's there is aware of that. But I'd also, I'm interested in knowing whether after getting divorced, whether you considered going back to Egypt and what it was that ultimately made you go back to Egypt in 2020 when you did.
Well, okay, so I got divorced in 2011. I had a job at that time in Kuwait. My daughter was going to school in Kuwait. My ex-husband by then was still working in Kuwait. And it's important to say that it was an amicable divorce. Like we stayed friends after that. But I was then confronted with the choice: should I go back to Egypt now, be with my family, and like go back and start, or resume my career in Egypt. I was in my 30s then, like before it's too late, and maybe it's time to that my daughter also goes back to Egypt, or to give it a try and stay in Kuwait and try to make it work, because the upside of that would be that my daughter's education would not be disturbed. She would stay at her school, stay with her friends. She'd be still close to her dad, because her dad had no intention of moving back then. And actually, because of how Kuwait is, that once you leave Kuwait, your residency will be canceled, you lose your job, and there's no way you can come back. Or you can, but it will be very difficult. So I felt that, if one of the choices is irreversible and the other one is, so why not give it a try and stay in Kuwait? Like I was scared at the time, because I would be a single woman in Kuwait and just living with my daughter, and I didn't know how well that would work and whether I'd be able to, to make a living that will be sustainable enough. Like I had many doubts, but I thought that it would be better to just, stay and see how it goes. Like Egypt is always there. Like I can always go back to Egypt whenever I want. And I decided therefore to stay. And actually it wasn't a bad idea at all, because I stayed for 11 years after that. Not at any time did I feel that this was, it was unsafe for me to stay in Kuwait as a single woman alone, or it was actually, that actually went very smooth. I had no problems whatsoever. Like Kuwait, other than being a safe country, it's actually a user-friendly country. If you want to, furnish a house, have something fixed at your home, go do errands, like it's a user-friendly, I think, woman-friendly country. Like I had no problems at all. And by the time I was divorced too, I had made many friendships at my work, so I felt like I had a very strong support system in Kuwait, away from home. Also my ex-husband, because we remained friends, we even stayed living together at the same building in different apartments, because we thought that this would be best for our daughter, that she can grow up between the two of us, and that wouldn't disturb, like her simple things, like where the school bus picks her up from, like we wanted our divorce to have as little impact as possible on her. So I stayed, and he too became part of my support system. So it worked for me. Like I would say it worked for me for 11 years. I stayed, and I really had no problems at all.
And what would you say ultimately, when you chose to come back to Egypt, were the main driving forces of that decision?
Well, the main driving forces of that were, some of them had to do with me and some of them had to do with Kuwait. The thing is, my daughter had left university since 2018, so I was living alone, and that was fine. But mainly, I think it's with COVID, when the COVID crisis started worldwide, that's when things started getting a little unpleasant in Kuwait. Like you could see that, Kuwait always has this thing about it where expats are treated as leeches, uh, like they're there to, I don't know, how to say it, but they're always viewed as if they're there to exploit the country, and revel in its resources and its luxurious life. And people say that, missing the fact that these are people who work and contribute to the country and contribute to the economy, and that's always been the case. But I think that after COVID, that has manifested in many ways. I would say many ugly ways, like because with the limitation of resources and medical facilities and things, you started seeing that face of Kuwait that really wasn't very pleasant to watch. Also, the fact that like expats have been viewed as the reason for the spread of the virus, and some laws were made that were applicable only to expats. And for example, entry to the country has been denied to expats for over a year. Like, they've only started accepting that expats enter the country just maybe a couple of months ago. For a year, that's been suspended, and that, for anyone who's living away from their family, is terrible, because people felt like they were trapped in Kuwait. They were stranded. They couldn't go see their families. Their families couldn't come see them. So many people experienced things as family members getting sick or passing away, and they just couldn't be there for their families. And I think that this is a form of inequality that is impossible to bear. I mean, when you're in a country as an expat, you understand that you're not a citizen of the country. You don't have all rights that are available to other citizens. But that was and already Kuwait segregates in many ways between expats and citizens. Even in simple things like, if you want to renew your driving license, you can only go after 3 p.m. because the morning shift is only for Kuwaiti. Although everyone there has government medical insurance, but some medications are only prescribed to Kuwaitis, So that has been going on for a while, and it was okay, this is the country, this is how it works, fine. But when you feel that you can't go see your family, or that especially that the country has been under lockdown for many months, between partial and lockdown, so it just became a very lonely existence, and Kuwait just felt like this huge prison, and to me that was unacceptable. Besides the fact that my mom had passed away during my years in Kuwait. I mean, I was lucky enough to come and see her 1 week before she passed away. But, in the last couple of years before she died, she was sick, and I wasn't there for her. And now that my dad is here, and I felt like, how many more years do I need to waste away from family? I mean, I feel that this is the time to be back with my dad, to make a contribution to my family, to be there for them, and to feel the warmth of being among your family. So as much as I love Kuwait, and it will always hold a very special place in my heart, I felt that this was enough. Like, I can't take this anymore. I can't be here anymore.
Thank you so much for sharing everything that you have shared. Do you feel that migrating to Kuwait, either, the combined experience of migrating to Kuwait as a child and as an adult, that it's changed your relationship to Egypt at all?
Well, if it has, I think it has made, in a positive way. It makes you appreciate things about Egypt that maybe someone who hasn't left the country at all wouldn't appreciate. Like being with your family, having access to them all the time, being among your people. I think that this is important, and I think that it goes unnoticed if you don't experience anything otherwise. But also living abroad, I think, has been very enriching, like to interact with people from other countries and other cultures on a daily basis, at work and at the supermarket, at the doctor's clinic, everywhere. I think that this is very enriching and very it's an eye-opener. Like, for example, in Egypt here, like as Muslims, for example, in Egypt, like we are basically Sunni Muslims in Egypt, okay? But in Kuwait, there have been Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, and I've had a lot of friends, or I have a lot of friends who are Shia Muslims, and that was very interesting because, you know, because they have their own rituals, they have their own days that they observe, and to me, I think that being exposed to that and seeing this variety wouldn't have happened to me had I not left Egypt. So I think that living in Kuwait has been a very enriching experience for me.